Be sure to catch it this weekend or next before it's gone. And Poster House is open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Thursday through Sunday with extended hours and free admission on Friday. We are also joined by Jodi Shapiro, curator at the New York Transit Museum. Their exhibition, Shining a Light on the Subway Sun, will be on view through early December. The New York Transit Museum is open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Jodi and Es-pranza will be exploring the visual and cultural history of the Subway Sun, and will discuss the ambitious campaign of distinctive posters that are posted in subway cars to encourage riders to explore New York City by way of the IRT. So without further ado, please help me welcome Es-pranza and Jodi.
Thank you all so much for coming. Jodi and I kind of decided a long time ago when this was first pitched that we were just going to nerd out today. So join us in nerding out. I hope you'll entertain it.
Buckle up.
Yes, no, seriously, there will be a lot of nerding out. We have to keep ourselves on time though, so we'll try to keep it cute. At the end, we'll of course open it up for questions if you have any. So just think through those, and we'll try to save some time for that. So you're here for the Subway Sun, a curatorial conversation, and I think we're gonna think about our broad curatorial like ideas while doing our shows and kind of where we intersect and all these little nuggets of information that we found. So of course, you're a poster, so you got to do this. We have to do this. So broadly speaking, posters have been pretty present on the IRT, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, by the way. Posters were pretty present on the platforms outside of these ornate entrances. You see that it says Len Lend. I saw a photo that was advertising like Liberty loans. You'll see them on the side, but there was another one that was at a different angle. So posters have existed in the subway system, around the subway system, but they weren't always welcome. I know that. Jodi, do you want to talk
Well,
about
when the plans were being developed for what the stations would look like, there was a heated argument about whether spaces would be allotted for advertisements or not. And it was decided that to not have advertisements at the outset would be a mistake because at some point it was going to be a necessity. So they built spaces into the stations, and you can see them. They're like little recessed rectangular spaces for that are poster sized. But advertisements have been on wheeled conveyances ever since wheels were put on carts, basically. So advertising in the transit system was not new when the subway opened, but it became a little bit more pervasive when the subway did open.
yeah, and like many things, I mean, many things at Poster House, we always have to keep in mind that like these things were not meant to be like collected and then in this beautiful gallery. Maybe beautiful is not the right word for this subject matter, but in a gallery space like this. And so think about that as we talk about the Subway Sun, because Jodi has a interesting story about how they got the Subway Sun collection, and then we also have like not as interesting, but they were just never meant to be collected. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, very ephemeral, printed on inexpensive paper, and just kind of slapped onto the cars. In there are ad spaces in subway cars, but subway suns were not printed in the size that fit in those ad spaces because they were meant to be pasted on the windows of the sides of the cars, as you can see pretty clearly in this photo and in the next one that Es-pranza is going to show.
Yeah, and the Subway Sun ads, they're not, like you go into these old trains and they're selling you ketchup or relish or whatever. I'm just thinking about food. I'm so hungry. And so they're selling you all these products, but the Subway Sun is in its earlier iteration, and we'll speak about it. There's like a specific purpose for these Subway Suns, published by the Interborough Rapid Transit Company. And up until a couple months ago, I had no idea the actual date of the Subway Sun. I don't think either of us did. I don't think most people do, or anyone who collects this stuff. And I think we were broadly just saying like 1918 because that was the year for sure.
But the campaign started.
Right. And then I don't know what compelled. Every day I feel like I'm looking at new Subway Sun stuff. Like I'm always like, wait, actually I have a question about this. And so I had a question about the Subway Sun. And so I probably just like put this into Google Books, and I found the actual day that I guess the first one was published, which would have been July 22nd, 1918. And so I guess now we can give credit to that, but also There's a bit here about Ivy Lee, which and this goes into the like, how do you make these curatorial selections? Because I grabbed this and I was like, okay, cool, this is the date. But I know that Jody saw more to this one about Ivy Lee.
So Ivy Lee was an advertising wizard who was the brains behind the Subway Sun campaign. And the reason why in our exhibit we don't really talk about him is because he's kind of a divisive figure and he did some things that were not very kosher. Um, he died before he could be investigated by Congress because he was accused and it was proven that he helped the Nazis during World War II uh, in a way that seems very obvious that he should know that he was helping them, but he always swore that he didn't know that the companies that he was devising marketing plans for were actually arms of the Nazi regime. Uh, one of the companies I think was Persil, and there was another one, the company that makes Persil, which I can't remember, and some other company. And I'm just like, it's pretty obvious who these people's money is going towards. So how did you not know, Ivy
Like
Lee?
covering his eyes the whole time.
Yeah.
And I know you contemplated whether you were going to put that in the exhibition at the
It was one of the things that with any exhibit that gets developed anywhere, there's a process where you start writing down things that you want in the exhibit or things that you'd like to show or a story that you'd like to tell, and you think that this is the story that it's going to be. And then you look at the materials and you start organizing them, you start doing some more research on them, and then maybe another story shows up. I did want to include Ivy Lee in our story because, just saying that the Subway Sun, was in existence and then Fred Cooper took over, and then it seems kind of like throwing you in the middle of the story. But because there would be so much context needed for Ivy Lee and like why he did the campaign and he was gone, it was a little bit out of the New York Transit Museum's curatorial purview. So it was decided to leave him out. But just because it's not on the wall doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. So I'm talking about it right now with Es-pranza.
Yes, nerding out. Yes.
But that's part of the process. And there's somebody in the audience now who is on the other end of my curatorial process right now and is going through like seeing these decisions happen in real time. Like, we're getting rid of this because it doesn't fit, or this is not a good enough grabby part of the story, so it's going to make room for something else that is prettier or more interesting.
And we have a few other things that give you the little behind the scenes moments. I added this picture. I mentioned this to Jody. I love this photo. One, I really love it because we actually have this poster in the Poster House collection, and it didn't make the cut because if you look really closely, I mean, it's not the best photo, but if you look really closely, it actually advertises like going to the theater district, and in the lower register, there's like Santa Claus ringing a bell because it's a Christmas. This would have been just on display in during Christmas, and it's a red poster. I realized that the Subway Sun was going to be up in the spring and summer, and I was like, I don't want to think about cold weather, so I'm not. That was an easy cut to make. And there were a couple of times where I did that. I was like, nope, I'm not taking myself out of beach mode, so that didn't make the cut. But the second reason why I really like this is because this fabulously dressed woman is holding on to the handle, and if you look at the bottom, there's a man in a hat, and he could have given her the seat. She's like she wants to read her newspaper. But anyway, this is just it's a great image. And the Subway Sun, a lot of people don't believe this, but it would have been like taped to this window.
Yeah, it's just taped with regular tape.
Yeah, like imagine doing that now with the way New Yorkers act. No, but at this time, yeah, it would have just been at that like that two-seater that you usually sit on, and then we'll talk about how that size evolves later on.
But seeing how they're implemented in the subway cars makes it kind of miraculous that we even have them around anymore at all, because although I'm sure people from the 30s and 40s were a little bit more conscientious about not taking things that didn't belong to them off of subway cars. Maybe some people took them, but I'm sure they got just banged around a lot. Just looking at her, I'm sure that, people with bigger hats than the guy below, or something, that they got ripped, they got torn up. And also they were only up for a finite period of time, only for a couple of weeks for each one. So they would probably just be torn down and thrown away. Yeah. I also like she's got the commuter fold. Like, people don't really read the newspaper on the train anymore, but the commuter fold
She's balancing a lot of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, she's got
She
the
has a
bag, she's got
pocketbook. Yeah.
I tried to explain the commuter fold to somebody just like 2 weeks ago, and because they had never really seen anybody reading a newspaper on a subway before, they just had no idea what I was talking about. But when I said it, I saw a bunch of people nodding. So real heads know. That's, so this is a elevated express. So there were two campaigns that the IRT did simultaneously: Subway Sun and Elevated Express. Subway Sun was in the subways underground. Elevated Express was on the elevateds above ground. Elevateds predate the subways by several decades, and this is one from between 1918 and 1936. The banner, the little people with the heads, that is a Fred Cooper drawing. So Es-pranza and I were talking about this just minutes ago, and I think that this may be a Fred Cooper drawing, but we're not sure because it's not signed. He signed everything else. Um, so it could be his. I feel comfortable saying it's of his era, but I'm not sure. So
Actually, the more I look at this, he also did hand lettering, and these look
yeah,
like
and that
looks
looks
like
a lot
lettering.
like the type of G's that he makes with the little ear on top. So I feel like this is probably a Fred, but one of the things that Esperanza and I both agree on is, like, curatorially, if you're not really sure what something is, you don't say what you think it is. You can give it context and be like, I feel comfortable attributing this to Fred Cooper, but you know, just for scholarly truthiness, I don't want to say this is Fred, but it's sure it smells like a Fred. It looks like a Fred. It's probably a Fred. I love also the bird's eye view of dudes in hats. They're all dudes. They're all wearing hats. I adore everything about this. And this is sort of typical of an early Subway Sun Elevated Express, where before Fred took over, where there is a drawing and there's some text. And if you go to the next slide, this is way more typical of what an early Subway Sun is, which is verbose text in different styles and weights, and basically advertising an event to go to via subway or elevated, or something about civic pride or civic duty. And I have to look at my notes because I want to make sure that I get all of this right. So when illustrations were used, there were usually popular illustrators of the day like Claude Millard or Ernest Hamlin Baker. And unfortunately, in the New York Transit Museum's collection, we don't really have any of those. We have some text-heavy ones, but a lot of those are at Princeton because they have a collection of Ivy Lee's papers.
Yeah, yeah. They have those earlier versions, the text heavy. The only illustrate, like the most colorful I saw for those earlier versions were for usually around the holidays. I saw a Christmas one that the Princeton collection has, and that was the most colorful that they would. And then they're like, nope, no more color for you. We're going back to
Yeah, they were pretty stingy with the color, but
yeah,
I guess that was also of the time where it was
printing.
extra expensive to put a second color on, or even one color.
This is also done during, it's 1933, so this would have been at least during the time that Fred Cooper, at least leading
Yeah,
up to
right.
Fred Cooper's.
Yeah, right in the beginning. And the next one that we have, which is, this is definitely during Fred's tenure, and this is just a callback to how verbose they could be. This is basically explaining, don't be a saboteur, and telling you what's going to happen to you if you do that. So I don't like, I never like reading the text that's on the slides because I feel you're adults and you can, but I will reiterate that the poster series was ended during the Second World War for a couple of years, and then they were continued, and Fred was asked to continue on after they brought it back, and he said, no, thank you.
And I hate this because imagine like my commute is boring enough. Imagine reading all of this. I saw one from 1918 that said if you're a man 18 to 35, remember to enlist in the draft. And it's like, who wants to read that in the morning?
Yeah.
That's like so miserable. But I think there's like this like the average rider spends around 15 minutes or something during their train commute.
Something like that.
Yeah, so it gives you, I guess it gives you something to read for.
And they're very dry, they're very humorless. Even the ones that have illustrations in them, the illustrations aren't really that grabby or fun either. They're very, very cut and dried and very rote, and no offense to Millard or Baker, but I think that's also because the people running the campaign were like, no fun
Yeah.
allowed.
What is it?
This
Thomas
is
Murray?
this is business. This is serious.
The subway son is so
Yeah,
serious.
it's very serious.
So now we've been throwing this name out, Fred
Yeah.
Cooper. At Poster House, our entire collection is made up of Fred Cooper. The Transit Museum's collection is a lot more diverse. So we actually want to spotlight two of the most prominent designers of, and actually the reason why the Subway Sun becomes so successful.
So this is Fred G. Cooper, and it's a picture of him in the. He's a very serious looking guy. So also dates, I got to make sure I get this right. So Fred lived from 1883 to 1961. So in the mid 1930s, he takes the Sun campaign from Ivy and the people that he has working. And Fred is a really good choice because at the time he was the cartoon editor of Life magazine. Magazine was like a news magazine. It was mostly a humor-based magazine. All of that. He was an illustrator of quite some renown. He worked for Con Edison for a really long time, basically until his death. And the careers of lots of artists, but one of the things is on the next. Oh, he was one of the co-founders of the AIGA, which is pretty awesome. But one of the things that he's most known for.
This is an interactive component, by the way, everyone. Yeah. Start thinking.
So he is credited with basically creating clip art before it was clip art. This is not a clip art, but he made these little cartoonettes that are humorous. You can already see his style is pretty, with the eyes and the exaggerated expressions. But he made little spot illustrations that weren't related to any particular story that could be reused over and over and over again. So something that he drew in 1930 could be reused all the way up to the 50s, and did. And so that's what clip art basically is. So that's Fred. And I love these. We have several of these that are not related to transit at all in our collection. From our first deposit of Subway Sun related materials from our Amelia Opdyke Jones collection, which the museum got in 1998. And that contains a lot of correspondence from Fred to his protege, Amelia Opdyke Jones, who we're going to talk about a little bit later. And some of his work from life and some of his concept drawings and some of these, but none of his Subway Sun related work. So it's all personal between him and Amelia.
And then we're going to give $10 to whoever can guess. No, I'm joking. We're not going to pay you. But does anyone want to take a guess at what's happening here? Because there's no right answer, because I thought I knew. And then maybe I'm wrong. Does anyone want to take a guess? You've had a couple of seconds to look at this. There's absolutely no right answer. I thought he was dragging the tiger to school and reading, like, I don't know. I thought it was funny with that logic.
It's funny, but like it's funny in that way where you're supposed to be laughing at it,
yeah,
but you're not sure why.
Yeah. Anyone? It's okay. That's
It's
okay.
fine.
We'll ask you again at the end. And then my idea of the show. So when I was thinking about this show, because this would have been my first time seeing Fred Cooper's work, and now I even said it. I was like, I feel like I know him now in an odd way, but I'll explain more why I say that. There's not much about Fred Cooper. There's a book. It's like $50. I know the Transit Museum has a copy. I borrowed a copy from the Society of Illustrators because Fred Cooper was a founding member. Not to be confused with Cooper Black, which is a type, or the Jello Cooper.
The Jello Cooper.
This is a different Cooper, but he was credited for a while as like the Cooper Black. But I read this Appeal of the Cartoonist, and I realized that he says it in his own words. He says the responsibility of an illustrator or a cartoonist is to combine subject knowledge with humor. And once I understood that, I understood more of his posters. These are more examples of his work, like his cartoon style. He was known for these big-headed cartoonettes, but he could also take on a more illustrative style. And these are some things that helped me understand who this was and why these posters were so important. I like this over here because yes, it's more political cover for Collier's magazine, but it's also just that idea of that subject knowledge with a little bit of humor. He's not just trying to be funny here. Like there's also a message that's being conveyed here, and the closer you look, the more you're like, oh yeah, a lot has not changed. And I think this is one of those posters, and I'm glad the color is showing up this way. This is on display. We have this one on display, but he has his big-headed cartoonettes. This is probably the most that I've seen him.
Yeah, there's a lot crammed in there.
And he's doing this thing where it's like, okay, of course, the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, beautiful, but he's essentially saying that, yeah, we have the cityscape in the background. That Brooklyn Bridge not only situates us, but everyone's turned with their back, like their back is against the Brooklyn Bridge, because the rose display is actually the showstopper in this one. And it's like little things like this make make the Subway Sun more interesting, and even show like Fred Cooper's range. It shows his humor. It's very subtle. And we mentioned it earlier, but they printed with like just one. It was text heavy. They printed with mostly black. When you did get color, it was for probably special occasions. This is technically only printing with one color. The second color is the paper. And so like there's a decision that's being made here, like this very beautiful rose like pink color, and you're gonna see that with these with Fred Cooper's designs, and then it changes a tiny bit with Amelia, which Jodi will speak about. But these are like just moments that I found to be
Also,
so.
this color is really unusual for the
Yeah.
30s. It's very bright, and pink is just not a color you see a lot in advertising at all in the 1930s. So
Colors are expensive.
so colors are expensive,
Mhm.
but also it's because this is about roses. There are pink roses. So he's thinking about that also as another way to get this message across. And just with one color, there's all this subliminal stuff happening.
Yeah.
So, he's got a very good advertising brain as well as an illustrative style.
And as I said, he does his subject knowledge and humor. So there's a poster that I saw that made it to the exhibition, but it features a ghost, and I was like, he wouldn't just put a ghost in there if it didn't mean something. If there
Es-pranza
wasn't.
knows Fred. He wouldn't just put
Yeah, I
somebody
know
in
that.
there.
I know Fred. Me and Fred go way back, and he wouldn't just do this. So I started to think, like, I started to get into his head, like, okay, he has to. This always feels very intentional. He doesn't like waste ink. He's really thoughtful about that. So I ended up just looking up lore of Van Cortlandt Mansion, and it was really hard to figure out because everyone wants a ghost in their historic place, because that's how you attract people, especially in the month of October. But also it's just like there's so much tourism around that type of stuff. But again, I knew it was intentional. So I looked at all of these old sources, and then finally I was like, I got to go way back. So I looked up I believe it's 1906.
Yeah.
History of the Bronx Borough, City of New York, like basically a textbook. It's a lot of pages, like I don't know, 300 maybe, I don't know. But I was just going through it, and I was like, I'm gonna find this. And lo and behold, I got to the section about Van Cortlandt Park. And what's mentioned, probably somewhere in this area, is that there's a ghost that actually haunts the halls of Van Cortlandt Mansion, or the rooms of Van Cortlandt Mansion, the British Captain Rowe. Some people say he's a Hessian, but he died from battle wounds. And the legend goes that he just haunts the halls of Van Cortlandt Park. And so it was part of the greater lore of this place, even as early as 1906, and I imagine earlier than that. And so that's when I was able to give this ghost a name. But Fred so kind, because he makes this a gracious ghost. So it says, "You are most graciously welcome." So he makes sure it's not a scary ghost.
And he also lets you off the hook if you're not really sure it is, because it says the old spirit still pervades the place.
Yeah.
But, I would have to assume that at this time in New York, people would have been more familiar with Captain Rowe because it was not, not closer, but they just taught different things in school back then.
Yeah.
And, even though I am from the Bronx, as you are, we were
Yes.
never taught about Captain Rowe, or I don't think I was ever taught about Van Cortlandt Mansion in school. So
Yeah, this one, yeah, and this is his big-headed cartoonettes.
yeah, big-headed cartoonettes.
And then you get your
With big hats.
with big hats.
Big heads mean big hats. So this is A different example of what Fred would do. This is a pretty straightforward illustration for him. And since this is early in his tenure at the Subway Sun, because this is from 1938, you can see that some of his humor is in there and the expressions of people, but they are not the big-headed cartoonettes. And you can see that maybe he's starting to figure out what his constraints are within this campaign, and who the Interborough Rapid Transit companies, upper management, like what they want him to say. This is a typical courtesy message of the time. At the New York Transit Museum, we love telling people that manspreading is not a new problem. It's been going on since the subway opened. The same thing with blocking the doorways. I was just in Chicago recently and was appalled to find out that people in Chicago do not wait for you to leave the train. They just go in, and I was the stupid one who waited for people to get off at a very crowded stop in the Loop area. And people looked at me like I was from Mars because I waited for everybody to leave before I pushed in to try to get a seat, which I did not.
New Yorkers are polite.
New Yorkers are more polite than Chicagoans. There, I said it. I said it. So this is a little bit later. This is only 2 years later, in 1940. And so now you start to see the Fred that we know and love, where there's not only humor, but he's drawing some very cartoony things. And I think even though Fred drew a lot of big-headed cartoonettes, I think he really enjoyed drawing animals a lot. I just love this. I love everything about it. The nature of the gossip, the flightless bird and the penguin. Fred really likes birds. And, the seal, and he's wearing the See New York First shield, which is something that Fred came up with for this campaign, because that was the whole idea, was to encourage people to take the IRT to places in the city and enjoy being a New Yorker. And the culture within.
And he came up with the masthead too, right? The
Yeah,
design
he drew the masthead for the Elevated Express and for the Subway Sun.
A riff on the sun.
Yeah.
The sun.
So Fred's fingerprints are all over this campaign at this point, which is pretty great. This is another one from our collection that I love, and it features something that Fred is, I consider it his signature outside of his Fred Cooper signature. Fred really liked birds. They often have a question mark over their heads. This one in particular looks a little bit angry.
Sometimes they wink.
Sometimes they're winking at you. They don't always look like this type of bird, but there's almost always a bird in his posters. And I think that's pretty genius, because it's just another way to identify these posters. It's a trademark. It's a signature. I also like the big-headed cartoonettes leaning out of the plane. One of the interesting things about this poster is that even though this is from 1940, it refers to LaGuardia Airport as LaGuardia. It didn't get named LaGuardia Airport until like 1949 or something like that. But when it was built, everyone referred to it as LaGuardia because it was one of his pet projects. So that was one of the big questions. It's like, why is it LaGuardia Airport if it wasn't called that until later? I'm like, because everyone, it was LaGuardia's airport.
LaGuardia. So. That also shows that Fred Cooper starts to get maybe some more agency in this design, because he can refer to it as LaGuardia.
It's just looking at all of this material chronologically, you can see him kind of feeling himself a little bit and pushing the boundaries with each one, and maybe all it was a question of him proving to his bosses, like, hey, if we make these a little cuter, if we make these a little funnier, if there's more of a wink to the commuters in it, that more people will respond to the campaign. And it was a very successful campaign. It always was, but during Fred's tenure, he took it to the next level, which was pretty cool. And this is a key point in transit history. In 1940, something called unification happens with the New York City subway system. It's unification on paper, and what it means is that New York City now operates all three subway companies. So there's the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, which is the IRT. Those are the lines that are now all numbers. That was the first company to build a subway in New York City. There was the BRT, Brooklyn Rapid Transit, which became the BMT, Brooklyn Manhattan Transportation Company. That happens in 1923. They were building subways in Brooklyn and Queens. Both ran elevated. And then in the 1930s, the city gets into the game with the independent system called the IND. So in 1940, to basically keep the BMT, the BRT, and the IRT from going into receivership, the city agrees to take over operations. So this is what unification means. Like I said, it happens on paper. The physical unification of the system is still happening. And it will probably never stop. And you can see that Thomas E. Murray, who is the receiver, Fred has drawn him with a little bit of a sinister look. I don't think Thomas Murray was very well liked at all.
Even the handoff looks a little.
Yeah, it looks a little sus, you know.
And then also on the masthead here, well, there's two things actually about this masthead. We no longer have this looking like, I mean, arguably still looks like a roller coaster, but it's a straight line now rather than that dip. And then
it's not just the heads. It's like, you know, it shows how crowded the elevated is, which is true because at this point they were running at capacity.
But it also shows what's happening in 1939, one of the biggest events of New York, which is the World's Fair. And that's 1939, 1940. And so at the sides of the masthead on the Elevated Express and the Subway Sun, you'll see the IRT line serve New York World's Fair and then ride on the open air. And then you have the Trilon and Paris Fair pictured on the side of the masthead. Just like it's clearly a New York event, and we were both talking about it. I don't know if you know anything, let us know. But I don't think the IRT took you as close as the other train line.
I think it's debatable.
It's debatable.
I mean, there was a Long Island Railroad spur there too.
Okay,
so
okay.
It
gets complicated.
It gets thorny. So.
Okay.
So
this is all Jodi.
Now we
this
get
is
to talk
all,
about
and I am like
Amelia.
locked in right now. Okay.
So Amelia Opdyke Jones, if you scroll, that's her on a subway car with Martin Ryan, who is one of the employees. He's got keys, so he's probably a subway operator. And Amelia was a friend of Fred's, so she went to Life magazine to sell Fred some cartoons, and she was very persistent. And he said, if I don't buy some of this woman's cartoons, I'm going to have to marry her. So he bought some of her cartoons because she was already married, and so was he. But they became friends, and he mentored her. Amelia was an outlier. She was a woman in a illustration field, and even today, there's not a lot of women who really do it. And she rose to the top of this field. She also assisted Fred in early versions of the Subway Sun because, you know, he was her mentor and always needed extra hands to sketch out things. So the reason why on the previous slide I said that she crafted the Subway Sun was because she thought of the ideas for the posters, she wrote the text for the messaging, and she drew them. This is a portrait of Amelia that was drawn by Fred for a report that Amelia's daughter did for school about her mother. And so here's some more history about Amelia. She was born Amelia Ross Opdyke. Her great-great-grandfather was George Opdyke, who was the Civil War era mayor of New York City. So she's a very old New York family, which comes into play a little bit later. And, you know, she was sick a lot as a kid, so she would entertain herself by sketching. And she realized that this was something that she was actually good at. And she started drawing one-panel gag cartoons that were syndicated by United Features Syndicate. And the next slide shows you one of them. It's called The Young Idea. She said that it was a spelling mistake, which could be true. And if you go to the next slide, this is a mat service sheet, which has a couple of days worth of cartoons on one page, and big-headed cartoonettes, but also very precocious young children, big-headed cartoonettes. Some people think that Charles Schulz stole his idea for Peanuts from her. If any of you know what early Peanuts look like, they look a lot like this.
You can't unsee it. You can't unsee
Yeah,
it.
now that I've told you, you're not going to unsee it. Some of my comics scholar friends have been involved in a very heated debate about this for many years. So I kind of bumbled into the fray and was just like, oh man, I'm stepping back. But yeah, once you see it, you can't unsee it. She also did work for Consolidated Edison, just like Fred did. She drew Ready Kilowatt cartoons for a really long time. She was the cartoon in the newspaper person, but somebody else did the merchandise for Ready Kilowatt. Somebody else did the promotional posters. Lots of people tell me, "Oh, my dad worked on Ready Kilowatt." I think that was a big project that had many hands in it. Here she is again with one of her anti-trash subway sons, and so this article from Transit Magazine, which was the house organ of the New York City Transit Authority, had a couple of articles about Amelia, but from this particular article was a really useful figure that so 8,000 copies of each Subway Sun were printed and posted. By the mid 1950s, the poster runs increased to 12,000 copies, but the number of the yearly issues were reduced to about 10 or 8. With that many pairs of eyes every day looking at this also elevated the success of this campaign. And it also had a noticeable effect on trash because with the next poster, you can see Amelia is credited with coining the term litter bug because nobody loves a litter bug. So an article from the New York Times says it's from 1940, it says, a tract for trash tossers bore the legend, nobody loves a litter bug, and introduced that pudgy little master of subway faux pas who was supposed to typify the untidy passenger. The public laughed at him, but would they find a moral in Ms. Jones's art? Recently, the Board of Transportation looked back on the results of its poster campaign. In previous years, transit police gave summonses to 10,000 passengers a month for violations of the sanitary code. Now the culprits number only 8,000. So if that is not proof of the power of advertising, I really don't know what is.
And she was riffing off of Jitterbug.
Yeah,
Jitterbug.
and you can see he's even sort of doing the suit. So, and she's duly shocked. Litterbug has endured. The other word that for littering on the subway is in the next slide, and that is gumbug. It did not stick, which is kind of a bummer, but this gives me an opportunity to talk about this in particular because this is a scan of one of her original paintings that was used for the ad campaign. Her medium is gouache on board. If you don't know what gouache is, it is a watercolor that is more opaque than other watercolors. And you can see the brush strokes. But the other really important thing about this is the guy that's scolding the gumbug, who is one of my favorite characters that I've come across in anything that we have in the museum's collection. He has what Amelia referred to as a completely anonymous face. So what that is, it is a face that expresses an emotion but does not patronize the person who is looking at it. And I really love this particular example of her work because with 5 lines, she's shown utter disdain for this person who is throwing gum. So the first line is the eyebrow, the second line is the bulb of the eye, the third line is the pupil, the fourth is the frown line, and then the fifth is the mouth. I know I'm ignoring the nose, but everybody has a nose, and your nose doesn't really move, so it doesn't count. Only 5 lines. So this is one of the pieces of evidence of Amelia's genius, is that she really knows how to distill someone's emotions into a very clean line, in economy of line, if you will. But also, in a lot of her posters, the original art that we have at the museum, there's not a lot of guidelines that are visible. You see the pencil lines are like around the figures, but often on the faces there are no guidelines. And there's plenty in our collection of these types of paintings where you see that she's painting these faces with a very narrow brush. maybe a brush used for lettering even. And there's no hesitation in her line. They're very smooth and they're very fluid. So that just makes me respect her even more, especially as a non-artist. I could not draw, I can't draw anything. I stick figure things, and even the stick figures don't really look like anything.
That's why we're curators.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not responsible for drawing
What did they say? Those who can't do teach.
And
Those who can't
teach,
draw
teach
curate.
gym.
So,
Okay.
ooh,
Joking.
sorry. Going back to the whole thing where Amelia was part of Old New York. In a lot, in some of Fred's posters, he's there, but in Amelia, he shows up a lot. Is Father Knickerbocker, who is there on the right side. And I want to tell you a little bit about Father Knickerbocker, known as Father Nick. Uh, the Knickerbockers were a real New York family, but Father Knickerbocker is a representative of what old New York was and would have been accepted at the time of these posters, but it's basically a fallacy because it's a New York that never really existed. Much like how people idealize the 1950s as like the best America, but the ideal version of the 50s didn't actually exist for anybody. So he is based on Diedrich Knickerbocker. He's the fictional historian that Washington Irving dreamed up to basically write a history of New York from the beginning of the world to the end of the Dutch dynasty by Diedrich Knickerbocker. Washington Irving, you guys know who he is, Headless Horseman and all that. The Diedrich Knickerbocker history was a very satirical look at New York and what happened with the Dutch. So I think Amelia's having a little bit of fun with her roots, mostly because she was part of that dynasty. Maybe she felt bad about it, I don't know. But this is also pretty typical of a poster from the late 40s, early 50s, because it's in two colors. It's in blue and orange. Why is it blue and orange? Because those are the colors of New York City. Mm-hmm. That's why all the best sports teams have blue and orange.
There, she said it.
The Islanders, baby. So sorry, Ranger fans. So what this tells us also, because it's in two colors, because much like Fred, for most of her tenure on the Subway Sun, she would have one color to play with. This is two colors, so the budget likely increased for a period of time during this portion of the campaign. And you can see that it's Mayor William O'Dwyer, and it also has printer's marks, like registration marks, so they knew how to make the plates from it to align the two colors, which is pretty great. That's one of the things I love about having production art like this, is where it gives you a little bit of insight into how things were actually made. We're going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation.
Yeah, and also note that now they're longer, right? We saw the original Fred Cooper on the window of the two-seater taped in. Now they've kind of figured out, like, okay, we'll make it longer. It's
to fit in the ad spaces above the windows of subway cars. And some of these were recycled on buses also, mostly things like this, which were not specific to the subway, but more for service, draft things, joining the civil service, keeping trash off the streets, joining the police force, that kind of thing. This is one of my favorites from our collection.
And the masthead has changed.
The masthead has changed. Now it's got the subway token in it. This is from 1956. And it is the day that the Rockaway line opens. And look at all those happy people going to the Rockaways. Even King Triton's really stoked that all these new people are going to come play in the ocean. And there is an homage to Fred. Right there is one of his birds. So lots of happy people riding on the subway on a line that had been closed for several decades at that point to passenger service.
And in Amelia's New York, the train tracks go over the water.
Yes.
So that's really cool.
This is one of Amelia's posters that lots of people are familiar with because it's from Coney Island. People who look really happy on the parachute drop, which makes you know that it's a fantasy because that thing is really scary. This is also a kind of a different size than the other ones because these were meant to be taped on the sides and not fit in the ad spaces. Ad spaces on subway trains become standardized around 1950 or so. because most of the older cars are gone.
Mhm.
There's still some holdovers.
Mhm.
It makes my job curating the cars a little bit difficult, finding the correct sized ads to go in the
Ooh.
cars.
That's awesome. Okay, and so now that we have the token, how much is the train? Because doesn't
So
that change because
this
it's
is
not
58, so now it is 10 cents.
10 cents, and so we
Yeah.
have the 10-cent token now.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
little dime-sized token
Okay.
at this point.
Awesome.
And this,
This one's famous.
this is that in the first deposit of Amelia stuff that we have concept drawings for this poster, and this was done in 1979. This was about 10 years after Amelia retired from doing the Subway Sun, but she and one of the founding people of the New York Transit Museum, a guy named Don Harold, they were really, really good friends. Don Harold convinced her to come out of retirement to draw a special Subway Sun for the not yet New York Transit Museum, because we didn't become the New York Transit Museum until the 80s, and then didn't become a properly accredited museum until the 90s. That's another story in itself that I'm not going to tell. But so we're called the Subway Museum. At this point, the museum's been open for about 3 years. And as the New York City Transit exhibit, or the New York Transit exhibit, depending on which poster that you look at to advertise it. Very confusing for us also. And so there's all these people who are very excited to take a shiny old car to Rockaway or Coney Island, but Don Harold is there. He is the guy with the glasses. Now, Don Harold was not an old man when Amelia drew this, so she drew him as an old man. And I've seen pictures of Don Harold when he got older, and he looks almost exactly like that. Don Harold died last year or the year before.
Wow.
He was around for a really long time, and a lot of our Subway Sun materials that are from Fred Cooper belonged to him,
Mhm.
that he had distributed to other people who in turn donated them to us. We got them in 2 batches. One was the drawings from Fred Cooper that the posters were made of, and then the other bunch of them came from somebody who got the posters that were made from the drawings.
And then I asked Jodi earlier because Amelia was a beautiful woman, and in a lot of these posters, especially for like the ones that she designed, I asked, like, did she draw these women in her own image? And then you had a really good story about that.
So I had the pleasure of meeting Amelia's granddaughter and great granddaughter, and so I had read from some interviews with Amelia that she used her kids as models for the kids that are in the posters, and her husband and other relatives, and herself. And so her granddaughter was telling me that everyone in her family ended up on a poster at some point, sometimes multiple times, and that they were a little bit embarrassed because they realized that all of these New Yorkers were looking at them without actually knowing that it was them, which is kind of hilarious to me. Especially there's a campaign now, a courtesy campaign poster that has Jano Lieber, who is the head of the MTA right now. He's in it, which is kind of funny. I did find out that they did ask permission to have him on the poster, but it's weird. Like, that is that Jano? I can't believe I forgot to tell people Amelia, she used to sign her work Opdyke when she was doing cartoons, but it's Oppie here. And that's because, to hide the fact that she was female. She felt that she wouldn't be taken as seriously as she could have been, Oppie, if she signed it Amelia or Amelia Jones or whatever. So when some of her more controversial posters would get written about, like the ones like Hit Him Again Lady, which has a woman hitting a man with her purse because in the way he's blocking the door, the letters would be received and people would say things like, the guy that's drawing these posters is encouraging women to be violent against men and they should be stopped. And Amelia was kind of outed in an article about these particular ads, and it was like, hold on to your hats, guys. It's a woman, horrors. So again, like we said before, a woman being an illustrator for such a visible campaign, and then having other clients, like the H&M, which is now New Jersey Transit, Con Edison, working for the people who did Ready Kilowatt, She also worked for the Bell System and for HIP, which is an insurance company or was an insurance company. I don't know if they're still around anymore. So she had a lot of high profile clients. So that's a testament to how good of an artist she actually was, because people kept hiring her and they didn't seem to care that she was a chick. So,
Yeah.
you know,
And then also like just because we're all here, it's interesting because we were talking about it that there's three exhibitions on display at Poster House that exist in the same timeline. The one that you're sitting in right now, like these earlier posters, look at the dates. They're happening in the 30s. Some of them are happening in the early 30s.
Yeah.
The Subway Sun is in the 30s, and then Dorothy Waugh is in the 30s. And even Dorothy Waugh is having to deal with the fact that that is a woman who thought of a poster campaign for the National Park Service. And this is before the formal title of graphic designer is like what it is today, of course. But even when we think about like the way women are ever present in this world, but often have to have like these safeguards around their identity because of the pushback
or
that
don't get credited at all,
Or don't- yeah.
which still happens to this day.
right. I don't know if the sound is gonna work, but here's some behind the scenes tips because we have talked and now it's time to watch. I really hope this sound works. But in doing this process, I don't know if it's the best part or the worst part, but you got to name the exhibition at some point. Like it has to happen. And for those who are able to see the Subway Sun here and the exhibit at the Transit Museum, there's storytelling, of course, behind it, and then the name comes somewhere in that process. I knew that the Subway Sun exhibit here, I knew I wanted to show notable locations, and I represented all 5 boroughs, by the way. So Staten Island, I'm looking at you because you're here. But I wanted to make sure that all boroughs were represented because that's what the Subway Sun did. And luckily, Fred Cooper and Amelia both were able to show that there's beauty in all of the boroughs or something interesting. I'm a kid that grew up on classic movies. I always make this joke, but I thought Gene Kelly was still alive when I was like 6. I was like, I want to date that guy. And because my mom always showed me like these old movies, and the one that I remember is On the Town. Has anyone seen it? On the Town? It starts with this great song sung by Gene Kelly, Frank Sinatra, and I'm forgetting the third guy's name. But they only have 24 hours, like in New York, and they think they're going to be able to see everything. We all know that's not possible. But it starts with this really cool
They're
song.
gonna try.
They're gonna try. It starts with this song. I don't know how to play this.
Jillian's gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, there's some time, but just listen out because it happens in the first couple of seconds of the song. But the song really inspired the name of the show. I can sing it myself.
New York, New York, New York, New York. It's a wonderful town.
Hey, fellas, what's the big rush?
We only got 24 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, we never been here before.
What can happen to you in one day? What do you think you're gonna do?
New York, New York, a wonderful town. The Bronx is up and the Battery's down. The people ride in a hole in the ground. New York, New York, it's a wonderful town.
But if you've heard that, I don't know if there's New York is New York, a wonderful town. The Bronx is up, but the Battery's down. The people ride in the hole in the ground. In the movie, they say in here, a hell of a town in the Broadway production,
Yeah.
but a wonderful town here. And those words from from the Bronx to the Battery, the Bronx is up, but the Battery's down. It sounded like a great way, like a love letter to New York City. The song is a love letter to New York City, but I felt like the exhibition was also a love letter, so it became From the Bronx to the Battery, the Subway Sun, because of On the Town.
and ours is called Shining a Light on the Subway Sun because it was more of an overview of the campaign and not as specific as yours ended up being, and also because titling exhibits is always my least favorite part because it's so difficult. Like,
Especially that part after the colon.
yeah,
'Cause then
that's
that's when
right.
you're
Yeah,
like, okay.
I almost every one of my exhibit titles has a colon in it, and it's just I don't know why. It's I guess because I'm trying to show people how serious I am. I am developing an exhibit right now that doesn't have one, and I've already been teased about like where's the colon in this one. So I'll
Gotta
have to
get
think
academic.
up a colon.
And then these are some posters that we have in our permit that didn't make the cut. So we came across our collection actually earlier last year. Angelina Lippert is our chief curator here, and she knew that I love New York City history. I love a lot of parts of history, but New York City history is just like, come on, it's amazing. So she said Chisholm Larson, a poster dealer, kind of close near near this museum. They had a collection of these posters, and she said, "Are you interested in these? Can you see a show in these?" And I was like, "Yes, I can." Thinking that it would, because exhibitions are planned like 3 to 5 years sometimes out. I mean, sometimes it's a tight crunch, clearly from this one, but I was like, I think we should purchase them. So we did that in January of last year, I believe. And then a show got booted. So then she emailed me again, and she was like, "How quick can you kind of get a show ready?" And I was like, "I'm on it now." And it was a matter of like, okay, so now like, what's the story? And I mentioned this earlier. I'll say it again. This one didn't make the cut because, as you can tell, it is for winter, and I did not want that on me. And so, because I knew the show was going to be in the spring, summer. So this again, another one easily made the cut. This one we were actually speaking about because the lore of Madison Square Garden, too many locations. They
locations.
want burned down. They closed this one. This one's still around. This one's kind of still around. It was too much, and I
There was the
realized
Madison Square Garden Bowl, which wasn't
yeah,
in Manhattan; it was in Queens, and it
it's
only
too
had
much.
boxing, and too
Yeah,
much.
it's
We
like
have
the
this poster in our collection also, so
It's like the Polo Grounds. There are so many places in New York that like move locations, and so that bogs down the label and the story you're trying to tell can get muddled in all of that. Night of Stars. How do we explain that? So this one didn't make the cut, but then we were speaking downstairs, and we were also like, even if you look at this design though, like Fred Cooper again is really thoughtful because he has this map. This like it's his own like interpretation of the map, but kind of true to scale because didn't you mention something about the
so
map?
so this one is from 447. Is that 37?
37,
So
mhm.
37. So Madison Square Garden has already closed twice at this point. So people may not really know where the new Madison Square Garden is. So he decided to be helpful and like here it is. But also this is in an era when subway maps were printed and developed by other companies other than the IRT, like Rand McNally or Hagstrom, and they were given out by like hotels and stores and things like that. So there was always an editorial slant to them. It was never just about transit. It was like, how do you get to our place through transit? So Fred is kind of running with this idea here, which is interesting. In just also the same reason why you didn't want to. I should know this off the top of my head. I think this is not in our exhibit because of the same reasons. It was just like, how do you explain to people what Night of Stars is?
Yeah.
Like, it's going to take a huge label to just go through all of that and then be like, how many people are actually going to read that anyway? Because we all know that no matter how well written the label text is, most people don't read it.
Yes,
I've
it's
learned
true.
to not get upset about that, but
Just deal
it's
with it.
you. But you do all the research anyway because it's actually fun.
Yeah. I looked at a photo 2 days ago, and found out that there were women's only cars in the subway system, and so that put me in
For a
another
short
rabbit hole.
period of time,
Yeah,
yeah.
for a short, bring it back.
When after they decided that women could run the subway because high speed trains, there were many articles like in the Victorian era, like talking about how women's nether regions and their internal things that make them women would not be able to endure the high speeds of these trains,
Of course.
which is totally typical of medicine at that time. But when you think about it, it's so ridiculous.
That's why
that
they were hitting men with the purses. 'cause
that's
of that,
exactly, yeah.
that
But like
nonsense.
that's why it's I feel like it's fun to do all this because like wait, people really believed things like that. And you'll even see in other advertising of the era where it's very biased in some ways, where it's like, men are always the polite ones, and or the women are like always impeccably dressed, like the women are never the slobs. But one of the later Amelia posters in our collection has a female juvenile delinquent, and that made me very happy to see that women could be delinquents.
Ooh.
She's wearing the
Uh,
pedal pushers and like like Sandy from Grease at the end. When she makes herself into what Danny wants her to be. Like that's kind of how this juvenile delinquent.
when I was
looks.
younger, I thought those were two different actresses. Okay. I also personally hate the amount of text in these, by the way, because it's really hard to, if you don't know the train system, this is kind of hard to follow. Like, I'm going to assume everybody in here has ridden the train at least once. If you don't know it well enough, like, these are a lot of directions. I don't know how people operate it well.
It's very useful though. I mean,
Yeah.
he's telling people that you can take the elevator to the elevated to Night of
To Night of
Stars. Also, there's
Stars.
2 elevators you can
Yeah,
do.
Madison Square
So,
Garden on Wednesday, November
That's probably why they
17th.
chose that location for Madison Square Garden, because it was so accessible by transit.
True.
I'm sticking to that.
And these didn't make the cut because I was speaking of location. Voluntary hospitals were actually all over, and so there was nothing specific. I was also going the tourism angle, and I thought that there were other posters that did Fred Cooper's work a tremendous amount of justice. This one's interesting because for the longest time I was like, "Where's the masthead on this?" Like, and it was sold to us this way. I hope we didn't pay full price, but I was like, "Where's the masthead?" And we just thought, you know what, this one just doesn't have it for whatever reason. It's that slimmer size, so maybe this, we had there was no date on it because the masthead's cut off. Until one day I'm looking at the New York Public Library's collection. I don't know why, but then I saw the full image that had the masthead. My guess is that the person who had these posters wanted to sell this almost as fine art, and Fred Cooper's name is on it, so they took the masthead off. We have 2 that have the masthead cut off, and you can actually see the cut. They probably wanted to sell it as like a Fred Cooper original, and so that might be why they did that. We'll never know.
Yeah, we have a couple of these that have the call outs cut out. So it just says Subway Sun, but the little "Our men know their job, safest railroad," which changed from poster to poster. These were like the 2 bog standard ones that they would have. Those are cut out also, and it's kind of like, why?
Yeah. I don't know.
What do you have against people knowing their jobs or safe railroads?
Yeah, or they'll name the Subway Sun.
Yeah.
And then this I added this because I knew people were gonna ask about this. How do we preserve these? And I actually just found out that it's not the same for the Transit Museum. So I'm very interested in like that long-term process. But when we own posters at Poster House, we do, depending on the condition, we do elect to linen back them. That is exactly what it probably sounds like. It's linen, so it's that cloth-like material on the back. It prolonged paper wants to die, like it wants to be out of this world. Basically what we're doing is telling it to keep going. It still has another run in it, and so we decide to linen back them, and so that's the image that you're seeing on all of your left, that really thick white paper in the back, and then eventually of course it gets framed in a very clean with the linen backing, by the way. This isn't for the, like, if we're working with somebody else we will always ask, but if it's in our collection we decide whether we want to linen back it. And in the case of the Subway Sun, it's better.
Yeah, it's a preservation method that is an industry standard.
Yeah.
These are printed on paper that was very cheap, and before the concept of acid-free paper. So what that means is that it was made from a type of wood pulp that was not treated in a certain way to take the acid out. So this paper self-destructs over time, depending on what conditions it is kept in. At the New York Transit Museum, we do not put these on linen backing because we are an archive. Above all things, we have an archive, and the museum makes exhibits from the archival materials. So one of the differences between a museum collection and an archive is that archival materials not always conserved in this way. And also, much like your posters, which were in perfectly good condition without the linen backing, most of the examples that we have of these era of Subway Suns have not had acid paper damage yet. They were kept in a pretty good condition before we got them, and we're keeping them safe and encapsulated in Mylar for now. But the more I think about it, the more maybe I'm going to bring up with our archival staff that maybe we should linen
We
back
will
some of
convert
these.
you. Linen back is good.
It's also it's not cheap to put them on
And it's
linen.
not cheap to reverse it, and that's why
yeah,
a
it's
lot of
not cheap
people.
to reverse it, but it is reversible.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the key for any archival collection is whatever you do to it has to be reversible. The
Yeah.
same thing with
Mhm.
museum collections. If you're going to mount something, it's got to be reversible.
Yeah.
So, it's a decision that I have some input into, but I don't have the final say. And I don't know, maybe someone will give us money to do it.
I hope so.
Maybe I'll have a bake sale.
I also should mention, before we even put it in like linen back them, this is probably gonna sound like bad words to your ears. So if you're sensitive, we send it off to our poster conservation team. Get a bath and bleach it. And I know all these words probably sound like, well, then there obviously are processes. Again, they want this paste to dye. We give it a haircut too, like trim off the little edges just to make it like presentation ready.
Also standard practice.
Yes.
Watching them restore pictures sometimes is terrifying because
know.
they get them really wet.
I
And then
know.
it's just to get fold marks out and
Mhm.
stain, like even paper conservation, to get stains out of paper, you've got to drip other liquid onto it to get liquid stains out.
Yeah.
And my friend's mom is a paper conservator, and like I would watch her work and be like, how is this not damaging? And it's just all the chemicals that you use. Like
Yeah.
conservators have many more PhDs and master's degrees than I would ever have the patience to get.
Right.
So
If you're
kudos to them.
if you
but
have
it-
anxiety, don't watch those
but yeah,
videos.
don't if you get nervous easily about the destruction of cultural materials, please don't watch any of those videos. So one of the great things about the New York Transit Museum's collections of these posters is that because we have Amelia's paintings and we have you'll see Fred's pastel drawings, is that you can kind of see the thought process that goes into when the artist is thinking about how these are going to be produced. Amelia liked to put swatches of color on her paintings to tell the printing people what needed to be in color and what color it should be. I also chose this one because you can see that she's used a textural film, like a brand like Zipatone or something like that, which is basically these sticky sheets of like dots or stripes, or these are speckles. And her instruction is, please print line of lettering at bottom this color and print all the rest black. So the next slide shows they followed her instructions, and you could see the texture is there. It's red because that's an important message for people to read. And her paintings are either the exact size or a little bit bigger than what the final printed piece are. They're missing the subway sun, obviously, because she's concentrating just on this, and this is some kind of overlay that was probably
I think it
just
was
like
a cast.
yeah,
I think they cast it.
probably.
Yeah. So no subway sign.
Yeah. And then this is one of the drawings that we have from Fred. And I love it because you can see some of his notations on the bottom about all the places. So Central Park, Van Cortlandt Park, Bronx Park, Prospect Park, Pelham Bay Park. There's his little bird right there with a question mark. So he's there from the beginning. Some of this is whited out just so that it pops out a little bit, probably because it was a little messy for his taste, maybe. He seems like a pretty precise kind of guy. And the silhouettes and everything is there. The Interborough with that big G bowl with a ball going through it. And then in the next slide, you can see that all of the stuff he wrote on the bottom is here. And the thing that was here before is now on the bottom. He's kind of tweaked the flowers a little bit. Bird's still there. And the figures, the little kid figures, are a little bit more defined. I just realized, like, it looks like the ball is the person's head.
Oh yeah.
It's a little grim. It's not. They're throwing their head back in joy. But so that's also, I'm fascinated with process. So getting these, and we got the drawings first in one donation, and then in 2024 we got the donation of some of the finish. So it was nice to match up both. Going in the catalog and relating them to each other. So if people's like, do you have the drawing for this? You can look and see. And it was a real education for me to see his thought process from the corrections. And some of the notes, I'm assuming, are in his handwriting, and some of them are probably from whoever is looking at the campaign to see that it has everything. I would guess with this one in particular that the destinations were much more important than knowing that you can see the map in the car. So I think that was a good editorial decision. There's some other ones that we have where I can't figure out why the decision was made to swap or why something was cut out. There's one where I think it's the park one that you have that's cut off, that top is cut off, where it's like baseball, rowing, it's tennis, boating, and 5 picnic grounds. Boating was a different word, and it's crossed out on the drawing where it was something else that's crossed out and boating is written over it. So, you know, there's nothing is ever final. So
Thank you.
so thanks for listening. Do we have time for questions?
I hope so.
I hope so. Told you we were going to nerd out.
I think we went over. Any questions?
Yeah.
Say that again. Is this one of the oldest exhibits that we've shown? Like the material? No. Actually, if you go to the hallway, to the stairwell, that is probably the oldest poster that we have, and I think it's from I want to say 1860 something or 70 something. It's old. And then one of our earliest shows was a Muka show. So it's old in context to today, but it's not the oldest that we've shown. But good question.
I found it referred to LaGuardia Airport in newspaper articles of the time also. So I think it was just, it was a vernacular and then it got officially named. I don't know why it took them so long to officially call it that, but I don't know, maybe because maybe they waited for LaGuardia to die.
Was it saying in LaGuardia's airport in those newspapers?
I saw it both ways. I saw it LaGuardia Airport and LaGuardia's airport. So, you know, you're welcome.
I noticed on the Madison Square Garden poster that, you know, the garden sits right on top of the 8th Avenue IND, but there was no IND. It was depicted there because it was an IRT poster.
Yeah. That was typical. Same thing with signage in the system at the time. When it was separated before unification, signs would say Interborough lines, blah, 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 and they would never really mention that you could, in some places, transfer to the BMT or the BRT or later on to the IND because they were still separate. They were competing for ridership.
Yep.
So yeah, that makes total sense to me why it's not there, but it is there in real life, just not in Fred's depiction.
Oh yes. Oh, someone guessed. Oh, wow. Thank you, John. That's good. It was for the illustration of. Oh, okay. Can you repeat that?
Thank you for that. Yeah, he's reading Plato also, which is not what people would think is typical for a farmer's son. But that is one angry tiger. I thought it was a dig against Princeton when I first saw it, but maybe not. So thanks for that clarification.
The current PSAs on the subway seem to echo a lot of these conventions. It's like an homage almost. They have the characters with the small strokes on the faces to show how angry they are. And they'll use a couple of colors and they highlight certain people. It seems like very much inspired by this.
Yeah, I would think that people who are in corporate communications now are scholars of this type of material. Only because also this stuff works. So why change it too much? This current campaign is a little bit different than the previous courtesy campaign, which was the red and the green people.
Yeah.
So the red people were the bad people, and the green people were the good people. Which, it's getting your message across in the simplest way possible,
Yeah.
but the most impactful. So, and tastes change. Like, I don't know if the authority would ever have a campaign like this nowadays, only because there's more stuff to read. And I think it's less of a tourism kind of campaign and more of courtesy, because courtesy seems to be the most important thing to the ridership right now, but that could change. I would love to see these things make a comeback,
Yeah.
only because one of the things that Es-pranza and I were talking about before is that in all of the Subway Sun, but particularly with Fred's, it's like, be a tourist in your own city and look at New York and look at all the cultural things that you could do here. There's so many posters about concerts.
Yeah.
Concerts that took place at the Met, which don't happen anymore.
Mhm.
Concerts that happened on what is now Roosevelt Island,
Mhm.
in the place where the stadium is now. There was like a band shell there. Prospect Park.
Even the cloisters
The
posters.
cloisters,
stepping
all
into
of these
medieval.
places
Yeah.
that, you could get there for a nickel or a dime, and, you live here, why not? And you don't have to go to Europe to see medieval anything. You can take the subway up to the cloisters.
Yeah.
So that's something that personally I'd like to see come back, because I think a lot of people who have lived here for a very long time, or who were born here, like Es-pranza and I, we kind of forget sometimes how much great stuff there is here to see.
Yeah.
So,
And you go
if
on,
you
like,
have
time
time to
out.
see it.
Yeah. You look up like things to do in New York, and we just look at that. But that was what these were. But I was gonna say that one of the most, like, the questions that I get the most when it comes to like media and press with the Subway Sun is like, what do you think about posters now? And it's almost as if they want me to say something very negative about posters. They want you to say. Usually they want you to say like, oh, the posters of yesteryear were so much better than what we see now. But I can't bring myself to say that, because I actually think that there are some posters that are still pretty interesting, and it does suck that there's like that AI campaign, I guess, that's going viral now, and I understand the frustration around that. But I remember this brand. I don't know if I want to say the brand, but I remember they did this poster on the subway, and it was all the archetypes that you would find in a New York City apartment. And I spent my entire ride looking at that, and then I was like, oh, I can't wait to see the next version in the next train car, or wherever it was, like next week. I don't know when they were gonna put it out, but I was actually like, this is thoughtful design. This is like what these things did, where you lean in and you look a little bit closer, and you kind of forget that you can just like look on your phone. You're just like leaning in a little bit. My phone was away, and then I remember seeing the next version of it. And so I know, like, the messages, history rhymes, or history repeats itself, or whatever you want to call it. But these messages are still around, but also that design, like that need for design, you can still kind of find it. Now they're digital ads. So I don't know what that looks like in the next 5 years, 5-10 years. But when there are moments in the subway that the posters are interesting, you kind of appreciate it more, I think.
Well, and doing the press for our show, it always gets posted to me like, don't you hate that? It's always like starts with a negative, and it's like, it's just a different time. People's attention spans are so much shorter now. So if you can't grab people with something like one big bold graphic statement, or a color or something like that, nobody's going to spend the time looking at it, because they could look at something else. People are glued to their phones. So I think having something like these campaigns on the subway now would make people look, only because it's something very unusual and there's a lot of text to read. But I don't know if it would be as impactful, because people seem to gloss over things that are too wordy. Much like, I would assume, the very early versions of the Subway Sun posters that were very verbose. I'm sure people didn't really stand and read all of the things that would happen to you if you were a railroad saboteur. I think they would be like, look at this list of things. Like, this is pretty bad. I'm not going to sabotage the railroad today. But I will say that some of Amelia's posters have come back in our system. The Rockaway Beach one of the woman with the beach towel shows up on the ad boards every summer for the past 3 summers, I think it's been. So people out there still appreciate this sort of thing. So, I don't know. It's all a continuum. I love it all because it's my job to love it all, but I really do appreciate all of it. And just it's a reflection of the changing tastes of New Yorkers, the changing society that we live in at large, and the changing attention spans of people.
Any other questions? Yeah. Oh. Well, let's get you.
Yeah.
When was the end of the subway sign?
It ended in the mid 1960s, somewhere between 1965 and 1969. And we know that because we have some subway signs that have the TA logo on them, the best
Transit
transit logo ever.
It is really nice.
I could analyze it for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
I'm not going to. So, no. But that logo was introduced at that time period, so that's when it ended. So
And they weren't doing many illustrations. I saw a photograph.
yeah,
of
no,
that
they
one,
were
yeah.
they went back to just like simple,
Yeah.
like this is, this, and some of them didn't even have the Subway Sun banner on them anymore. It used to be very large, then it got really small, and then it kind of disappeared. And you'd see the ones with the little token drawing. That was still, Amelia was still kind of in charge of it with those, and then she retired and came back for that one awesome nostalgia ride one. We've always I can't speak to previous curators at my institution, but I know that since I have been in the curatorial seat, I always try to mix it up with things in our exhibits, especially if we're talking about a specific time period, like the 70s, just to grab something that's been on my mind lately. There'll be some 70s ads in there because there's always something interesting to talk about. Since I picked the 70s, that's the introduction of Subway Standard into our system, and then Helvetica for reasons that are too stupid to go into. And there's a whole bunch of advertising campaigns that are based on these big, bold, single photographs of a tourist attraction or a place in New York, and it'll say, Fort Tryon Park, MTA takes you there. So, it's something that's present in every era because they've been in the subway since the subway opened. And it'll always be a part of our exhibits just because it's another facet to the story that the museum is telling. And I'm sure you guys feel that way.
Yeah.
If, there's always something. That's what's so great about posters and advertising is that, like with few other things, it's a small object that encompasses so much of a story that you could write walls full of text about them that nobody will read.
Yeah, yeah. Our rule is you find us a collection and we'll try to put on a show. So let me know if you have a collection. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jodi.
Thank you, Es-pranza.